It's Friday, November 18, 2022. And tonight, I'd just like to make a very short video that will be the precursor to a longer video in a few weeks. And that is on the topic of boat building on Mount Desert Island, Maine. Mount Desert Island is an island. Now it's joined to the mainland by a bridge, and the vast majority of people that come here come by car. There is no public transportation to the island, so unless you come by cruise ship or boat, automobiles are the only way to get here. However, that has not always been the case. Mount Desert Island was originally settled by Western Europeans in 1613 when the French established a mission at the entrance to Somme Sound, but that didn't last long because the British came in and destroyed that mission just a few months later and completely obliterated all sign of it. It wasn't until about 1761 that permanent settlement occurred on the island, and that was in Somesville, where the first settlers established themselves. Back then, the only way to get to Mount Desert Island was by sailing ship. So all traffic to and from the island was by boat. And that continued until 1837, when a bridge was built from the mainland at Trenton, Maine, across what is now the Mount Desert Island Causeway, where the current bridge is. And that bridge was privately owned and was a toll bridge until 1918, when it was taken over by the state and made into a public highway bridge. However, despite the bridge being there as early as 1837, the vast majority of people who came to the island still came by boat until around 1912 to 1913, because prior to 1913, cars were banned on most of the island. Southwest Harbor and Tremont allowed cars in 1912, but Bar Harbor, which is the northern part of the island, outlawed them until 1913. So the vast majority of people until that time still came to the island by steamship or steam ferry. Some of them would, there was train service to Trenton, and then you could take a ferry to Bar Harbor, and there was regular steam ship service from Boston and other points south to places like Bass Harbor and Southwest Harbor. Now, because this is an island, boat building has been very important on the island ever since the 1760s, when the first settlers of Western European origin arrived here. Because clearly, if they wanted to be able to control their travel to and from the island, they had to have a boat, and the easiest way to get one was to build it. So there were lots of boat builders on the island, starting in the late 1700s, through the 1800s, and into the 20th century, and up until about 1958, all the boats built here were wood. And as I said, there were lots of boat builders. Southwest Harbor and Tremont probably had a couple dozen boat builders building various types of boats, everything from rowboats to schooners back in the early 20th century. And many wooden boats were built here during World War II for the military. Matter of fact, the Hinckley Company and Southwest Boat collaborated in Southwest Harbor to build over 400 boats for the military during World War II. And of course, there were always people building boats for fishing. However, that started to change after the introduction of the fiberglass boat in the late 1950s, early 60s. And because fiberglass boats are much more durable and last a lot longer with minimal maintenance than wooden boats do. And so a fisherman could buy a fiberglass boat, and instead of keeping it for 10 or 15 years before it was basically worn out, could keep it for much longer and could then sell it to somebody else when they decided they needed a new boat. So the volume of boat building changed with the advent of the fiberglass boat, and also the type of boats built changed. From 1958 on, there were a number of people building fiberglass yachts for the yacht trade, and mostly for wealthy people. The most noteworthy company from that from that period is the Hinckley Company. But in the 70s, a number of other builders got going. John Williams at Hall Quarry started building Stanley yachts, which are lobster boat style motor yachts. And the Ellis Boat Company started building fiberglass boats. And Wilbur Boat Company in Southwest Harbor started building fiberglass boats. And Morris Yachts of Southwest Harbor started building fiberglass sailboats. And basically there were quite a few fiberglass boat builders on the island starting in the 1970s. Oh, and Jarvis Newman started building Newman powerboats and Newman Friendship sloops in Southwest Harbor. So that was going on starting in the 70s, and fiberglass boat construction, largely pleasure boats, although there were fiberglass lobster boats built on the island, continued up until around the 2000s. And around 2000, a little after, things started to change. Now, in the late 1990s, the Hinckley Boat Company introduced their now iconic Hinckley water jet powered picnic boat. And originally they built them in Southwest Harbor at their yard, but over the years they built enough of them that they couldn't keep up with construction there, so they built a construction yard specifically for their fiberglass powerboats off the island in Trenton, which is the mainland just off the island, and moved the bulk of their powerboat production, almost all of it, off the island. And they were still building a few sailboats, but over the 2000 to 2010 period, sailboat production at Hinckley Yachts, which had been the biggest producer of fiberglass sailboats on the island by a significant margin, basically dropped off to almost zero. Morris Yachts, which had been building fiberglass sailboats since the 70s, also gradually decreased its production and until Tom Morris died in the 2010s, and the company gradually faded away after that until Hinckley Yachts bought it, and now Morris Yachts more or less exists on paper only. In theory, you could go to contact them and order a new Morris sailboat, but I don't know if they build it anymore. They no longer have a building facility on Mount Desert Island. It's owned by Hinckley, and they did have a building facility just off the island by the Hancock County Airport, but Hinckley bought that and is now using it for powerboat production. So the chance of getting a Morris sailboat built is pretty slim. And similarly, other smaller builders of fiberglass yachts have decreased production. Wilbur Yachts, for example, had a generational change when Lee Wilbur decided to retire, and the company has pretty much faded away since then. They still have a website advertising their boats, but I don't think they've built much since, middle 2010s. Now, there are other builders who have basically kind of faded away too. The John Williams Boat Company in Somme Sound launched their first boat this year in 10 years. Ellis Boat Company in Southwest Harbor hasn't been building very many boats for the last few years. They still build a few, but many fewer than they used to build. And the Classic Boat Shop in Bernard, which built the Pisces 21 day sailor, has really scaled back production too. Now, there are a number of reasons for that. Decrease in production by the local boat builders. Some of it represents the cost of doing business on the island, and some of it simply represents shifts in the type of yachts people are buying. And since most of the builders here build custom or semi-custom boats, they tend to be high-end boats, and consequently, for that size boat, relatively expensive. So, Hinckley, for example, hasn't built a sailboat for 8 or 9 years, and similarly, Morris went away basically, and the Classic Boat Shop hasn't built a boat for a couple of years. Now, there are a number of factors into that. As I mentioned, the cost of doing business here on the island, and a big factor in that is labor. Attracting workers to the island to work in a boat building facility has become increasingly difficult as the cost of housing here has gone up, and also as available housing for rental has been shifted out of the long-term rental market into the short-term market for tourists. So, if a boat building company tries to hire somebody to come here and work in boat production, it's going to be very, very difficult for that person to find a place to live on the island, and most likely they're going to have to commute 30 minutes and 40 minutes an hour each way from some location off the island. And for a lot of people, that is not very desirable. So it's extremely hard to find qualified people to work in boat building on the island. And I have had a number of people I know in the boat building business mention that particular problem to me. Another issue is right now with inflation, builders are not particularly willing to embark on a build that might take the better part of a year for a fixed price, because who knows how much major components like engines, masts for sailboat, etc., that go onto the boat late in its construction life are going to cost. What you price out now when you're setting the price for a boat may be off by 10, 15, 20%. And given that traditionally the margin for boat construction has been comparatively small, it doesn't take much of a price increase for those major components to more or less wipe out the profit in building a boat. And that has made some builders reluctant to accept contracts on a fixed price basis. Of course, you can get a builder to build a boat for time and materials, but that means you don't know how much the boat's going to cost until you make that final payment. And that makes people reluctant to go into build contracts. So boat building on the island now has decreased dramatically over the last 20 years, to the point where I would be surprised if more than 5 or 6 maybe 10 boats at the high end are being built each year on Mount Desert Island, where 30 years ago, dozens of boats and high-end expensive boats were being built every year by a number of builders. And also, when I look back at the 23 years I've been here, the number of active builders has decreased quite dramatically. So things have changed, and that is reflected in boat building on Mount Desert Island. Okay, if you found this topic interesting, you can look forward to some more videos in which I look at some of the individual companies on the island, the types of boats they build, and the changes they've gone through over the last 30, 40 years. And we'll discuss, so those videos will be upcoming in the next few weeks. So if you want to see those videos, maybe you ought to subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, and I'll say thanks for watching.